I'm locked in now.
Now, let's get busy with the truth.
Yeah, there we go. I'm locked in. I hope you're locked in as well. Good morning, everybody. It's January 6th, 2026. Oh, man. A lot to cover today. Welcome to the Ignition News. We're fired up live. We're streaming the show live on our Spotify live feed, as well as our TikTok live feed. And then on Instagram, hi to the Instagram family. You know I love you, even though the app hates us. It's totally fine. Welcome, everybody, to the news. I'm locked in for the news. Got a lot to cover today. I know a lot of people have different top stories of the day. I try to curate what I think are the most important stories for you today, although it's hard to argue there's any one story more important. Obviously, we're going to reflect on the fact that today is January 6th. We'll get to that story later. 5 years ago today, a violent mob stormed the United States Capitol to try to overturn an election. As we'll discuss later in the show, America has learned absolutely nothing from that day. But let's first talk about what happens when corporate America collides with federal law enforcement. We've got a number of other stories, and of course, my rambling, ranting political commentary. Please do follow us along on the show. We do broadcast the show live. That is for a limited time that we'll be doing that. But go ahead and find us on your favorite platform. We do, of course, host the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We're as many places as you can be. I'm happy to tell you that the show is today sponsored by Ignite, fighting fascism in the age of its rise. I'm going to pause and only say that now because I do have an update on Ignite. It's a little bit of a New Year's surprise for everybody. Anyways, let's get into the top stories today. By the way, thank you for joining us. If you're live watching on TikTok, do me a favor, share the show with a friend. Let them know what this is all about. The reason we are doing the Ignition News is quite simple, and it couldn't be more clear in light of what's happened in Venezuela with the United States of America conducting this illegal operation to abduct Venezuelan President Maduro, bring him to the United States on the pretense, a show trial. If you look at the news, let me just go ahead and read some of the news headlines actually today. I was looking at this for a different story, but when you look at the news regarding this illegal unconstitutional attack, here's what some of the top news sites have to say about it. Trump's new imperialism recalls a dark period of U.S.-led regime change. Trump's new U.S. mission statement, strength, force, power. For subscribers, America's strongman places a huge Venezuela waiver but invokes nightmares of regime change disasters. CIA strike brings Trump closer to grave New Year decisions on Venezuela. Just completely normalizing and obstructing what's actually happening. And that is because corporate media is afraid of the president. That is because with one tweet or Truth Social, the president can try to end a company. The president and his vast conspiracy network, along with the YouTube conspiracy theorist Nick surely you're not being serious, were able to successfully derail the campaign of a Minnesota governor and the former leading national Democratic ticket holder, Tim Walz. Tim Walz was the Democratic vice presidential candidate. He was literally number two. Number two, arguably, when you're the presidential ticket for a party, you are the leader of the party by de facto. That's just the way it works. So he was the number two of the Democratic Party. We can argue that whole conversation later. You all know how I feel about that. But the reality was the president's media ecosystem, along with the Republican machine, along with the conspiracy, disinformation, misinformation sphere, they were successful. And what everyone's getting really emotional about when you have the conversation about Tim Walz and what happened is, quite frankly, they're getting emotional and they're not pulling back what's actually happened. And that's what I'm trying to challenge you to do here on the Ignition News, is remove the emotion from it and understand what happened. What happened is a vast right-wing media ecosystem was successful in deploying misinformation. They derailed the vice presidential candidate. He's now not running for office again. And whether or not you liked that, whether or not you're happy about that, the fact is it was extremely successful. It was an extremely successful misinformation operation that succeeded in derailing the campaign for governor of the former Democratic ticket. And the damage and the lack of information, the lack of messaging, and the lack of any kind of counter messaging from the Democratic Party, they might as well just be, they might as well just throw in the towel at this point. Like, I really don't understand it. They didn't even try. And so before we get into the news stories today, I also want to talk about, because we're on the eve of January 6th and what was one of the most violent attempts to overthrow the United States government in history. A lot of the reason that Walz and his supporters are citing as the reason that, Tim Walz stepped down was threats of violence from Republicans or from MAGA specifically. And I would tell you, I think it sets a very dangerous precedent when we teach a political party in the United States of America that they can threaten you out of running for office, or that they can threaten you or your family and they can scare you away from having a voice. And indeed, probably some of the most chilling things that I saw were not Tim Walz stepping down, Because as much as I believe that there were obviously threats to his family, I think the core decision for Tim Walz stepping down, very honestly, was just raw politics. He was too politically damaged to continue to run for governor. He would have placed that state, which is, by the way, moving farther and farther to the right. He would have placed the state at risk of losing a major Democratic ticket at the top. And the reality is, when you look at 26 and 2028, when you have a major ticket like that move to the right, the rest of the ticket likely moves to the right as well. And so it was a calculated political decision. But I really think it's dangerous when we start teaching people on the left that when you start having people threaten you, you have to back away or back down. I think that's the wrong message to be sending to people, because it only emboldens the fascist. It only emboldens those people trying to cause harm. Obviously, because the lawyers would want me to make sure I'm very clear on this, we have been very consistent on the Ignition, on Rebel Radio, and Ignite that we don't support violence, political violence of any kind. But when we say we don't support it, what that also means is we can't run from it, we can't hide from it, and we can't be afraid of it. If they have successfully controlled the narrative of fear, and we can't allow them to continue to control the narrative of fear. We have to have each other's back. We have to stand with each other. We have to support each other. We have to be willing to say, we're not going to be afraid. This is our country as well. This country does not just belong to the person who's the most violent. This country does not belong to the person who makes the biggest threat. In fact, that is the exact opposite of what should be happening in this country. If people, threaten political candidates, they should be held accountable for that. But I think Tim Walz understands what a lot of people understand is we have broken the political conversation where, unfortunately, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, you are more protected. You are more protected than not. So that's a little bit of commentary early on that. But I think that we fail to acknowledge one major thing, which is a lot of these people are just sad little basement dwellers on Twitter, and they have nothing to look forward to, and they've been taught by their orange buffoon that they can say terrible things without consequence. You are doing the real work. You're out in your community making it better. You're the one that's doing things like mutual aid. You're the one that's trying to make every single part of your life better every single day. So don't be afraid of the little men in their basements. Let's move on to the next story. All right, let us get, by the way, to the first story of the day, kind of on the same theme of not backing down. You may have heard this story. Story number one on the Ignition News. Hilton cancels and then Hilton cancellations. It's about Hilton hotels. It's also about the immigration and enforcement surge in Minnesota. Over the weekend, the Department of Homeland Security publicly blasted Hilton hotels after a Hampton Inn in Lakeville, Minnesota, just outside Minneapolis, canceled reservations for federal immigration agents. DHS went nuclear on social media, accusing Hilton of launching a coordinated campaign to refuse service to law enforcement and asking why the chain was, quote, siding with murderers and rapists. Let's be clear about what actually happened here. One single hotel, independently owned and operated under the Hilton brand, sent emails to guests who'd made government reservations saying they wouldn't allow ICE or DHS agents to stay at the property. The emails were quite clear. We have noticed an influx of GOV reservations made today that have been for DHS, and we're not allowing any ICE or immigration agents to stay at our property. Well, guess what? That's capitalism. That's how it works. DHS is conducting what they're calling Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis, deploying up to 2,000 agents to investigate alleged fraud in Somali immigrant communities. This comes after federal prosecutors claimed that potentially $9 billion in Medicaid payments in Minnesota since 2018 have been made or fraudulently obtained. The Trump administration has made this, of course, a centerpiece of their immigration and enforcement strategy. It ties directly into how we opened the show this morning. Now, of course, here's where it gets interesting. The hotel that canceled these reservations did so days before the agents were supposed to arrive. The management company, Ever Peak Hospitality, quickly issued a statement saying the cancellations were inconsistent with our policy of being a welcome place for all and that they'd moved to accommodate affected guests. Hilton Corporation distanced itself, saying it was an independently owned and operating franchise. But DHS was not satisfied with these apologies. They kept pushing, just blasting them on social media. The rhetorical escalation was obviously challenging for the brand. I'm sure they were getting bombarded with phone calls. I'm sure they had all kinds of terrible things happening here. Let's talk about what's actually happening, though, okay? Hotels in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, faced a lot of protests this last week as operations have ramped up. So there's obviously significant community opposition to this happening in their own communities. So people show up at these hotels and they protest. They honk their horns. They do all that kind of thing. So This is just unfortunately how, modern immigration enforcement is working in the United States of America. It's no longer just simple legal enforcement of immigration. It all has to be a PR scheme. It all has to be this PR narrative. So diving into that a little bit, after DHS tweets Hilton Hotel's stock drops 2%. That's really the message. We want to talk about one hotel here, but what we're talking about is a fascist government which is willing to attack companies personally. This is not capitalism, by the way. We always talk about this great system of capitalism in the United States of America. Unironically, we're yanking, foreign dictators out of their bedrooms at night to bring them to the United States because of supposed justice. But here we have the mechanism of the federal government literally going at companies, causing their stock price to go down. And the broader context here really matters. Minnesota has become a testing ground for enhanced immigration operations under the president. It's a PR centerfold. They were successful in their sort of misinformation campaign against Tim Walz. It's not about investigating fraud. It's about demonstrating federal power in communities, whether that's targeting Hilton brand and causing their stock to go down, or whether that's targeting individual hotels, operators, harassing them, that kind of thing. This is, of course, the point. What does it mean when hotels become infrastructure for mass deportations? What are the implications when businesses face this kind of coordinated pressure for just trying to stay neutral? What happens to the concept of institutional independence, right? When the federal government can essentially make you do these things. And that's really why we're talking about this story first today. It's to shatter the myth of this system that we are in, right? In any other time in American history, the idea of the federal government getting so deeply involved in the operations of a business would have been repulsive, especially to Republicans. But now you have almost the entire infrastructure of the government attacking a hotel brand, pressuring them, forcing them. Whatever happened to the idea of a business being able to decide who its customers are? That is how it's supposed to work. Every business has the absolute right? When you go into business, what does the sign say? We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. You can go to a candy store in the United States of America, a candy store, and there's a sign by the cash register. We reserve the right. No shoes, no shirt, no service, right? That's a fundamental institution of freedom. So we talk about the irony, the irony of this being the land of the free. There's no freedom in a major American corporation being bullied into doing this. So here's the consequence. Here's what happened. I'm pulling this up now. This is a tweet from the Hilton brand specifically. I want to make sure that I get the exact message, by the way. So Hilton Corporate releases a statement today. Statement from Hilton on a recent video. The independent hotel owner had assured us that they fixed this problem and published a clear message confirming this. A recent video clearly raises concerns that they are not meeting our standards and values. As such, we are taking immediate action to remove this hotel from our systems. Hilton is and has always been a welcoming place for all. We're also engaging with our franchises to reinforce the standards that we hold them to across our system in order to ensure that this does not happen again. Translation: Hilton is the official luxury staycation for the fascists. This is the wrong message. This is the wrong side of history. Hilton is picking a side. Let us be very, very clear. The easy path for Hilton would be to say, we're not getting involved. This is individual owner-operators have the right to run their businesses the way they want to run their businesses. We disagree with this, etc. Hilton, the company, is picking a side. They're putting their name in history. And they're making the wrong decision. It's the wrong statement. It's the wrong message. And they're on the wrong side of history. So that independent hotel operator made a decision, and that decision cost them their franchise with Hilton. This is what we always talk about, whether that's on Ignite or whether that's on the Ignition News. Fighting fascism is an expensive endeavor. Standing up to principles is a costly endeavor. It doesn't come free. It's not something that you get to do without consequence or without fear or favor. When you stand up to a fascist, you're going to have them push back to you. And for this individual operator, it cost them their franchise agreement with Hilton. And so the question remains, will you, the consumer, will you reward this behavior or not? Will you reward Hilton hotels for prioritizing cruel mass deportations and making their hotels the infrastructure for the American ICE enforcement operation? Or will you choose a different path? When and if you decide to stay at a hotel in Minneapolis or in Memphis or in Las Vegas, will you be deciding to stay at a Hilton, or does your democracy show up in your wallet? I think that's the important question. Welcome to the Ignition News, everybody. It's a big and busy day. Lots of stories to talk about. Lots of things going on in the world. Next, I do want to, we've talked about this. People ask, like, why do you have the Ignition News? Obviously, we've been talking about the Venezuela story a lot. Early Saturday morning, U.S. forces conducted a raid on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's home in Caracas, capturing him and his wife. They bombed multiple sites across Venezuela. They killed at least 40 people. I saw a report that it was up to 80 people, by the way. President Trump announced the United States will run Venezuela for an unspecified period of time. So let's just simplify that, of course. The United States invaded a sovereign country with which we are not at war. They bombed its capital. They killed at least 40 people. I've heard reports as high as 80. They removed the head of state, and they're planning to govern. I guess it's like a de facto colony of the United States of America. The legal justification for this remains sketchy at best. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio claimed lawmakers weren't notified because this was a, quote, law enforcement operation to execute an arrest warrant. But let's be very clear. Bombing a foreign capital and kidnapping its leader is not a law enforcement operation. That is an act of war. That's exactly why we should be seeing that kind of headline in major United States news. Whether you look at CNN, the AP, ABC News, CBS News, NBC News, the New York Times, they're all calling it a capture of Maduro or the arrest of Maduro, rather than calling it an act of war or an invasion. The bombing of the Capitol was an operation instead of something that killed 40 people. This is literally what state-controlled media actually looks like. The U.S. government is giving the framing, and the billionaires behind the desks are telling the reporters what to say. We have to recognize this for what it is. I talked about this yesterday. The New York Times and Washington Post both knew about this operation in advance, and they sat on the story. They didn't report the story. Now, ostensibly, this is to avoid endangering U.S. troops. Look at what happened to Hilton hotels. Look at what's happened to me live right now on recording the news. You have to think about what you say so that you can utilize this, quote, freedom of speech and still stand up to your government. And that's really scary. It should be scary to you. It's scary to me. What this is naked imperialism. This is the United States declaring that it has the right to overthrow any country, any leader, anywhere. And the thing is, no one supports this. 72% of Americans don't support this operation. We've normalized the idea that the president of the United States can just go in and conduct military operations like this. We've completely normalized it. Police told the station supervisors that they could arrest, how do I say this? I got ahead of myself in the story here. Let's take a pause. This story is challenging to discuss. Let me take a pause. It is difficult to even discuss something like this because of how far fascism has advanced in the United States of America and how much control the United States government is exerting on media collectives and media organizations. And if you think this was without consequence, let me get into why this actually is a conversation of consequence, okay? We have members of the United Nations, the Security Council, and U.S. allies condemning this action, calling for what it is. You have people in Europe expressing alarm. You have the president of Colombia saying this is aggression against the sovereignty of Venezuela. This is the first time that any major Western country has bombed a Latin American country. It's the first time this has ever happened. And again, if you think this is without consequence, or you think that speaking up against this government has no consequence, I want to bring you to the next story. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, a 22-year-old preschool teacher named Jessica Plitcha was arrested on camera immediately after giving a TV interview criticizing Trump's Venezuela operation. She was the only person arrested among roughly 200 demonstrators at an anti-war protest. Police issued a failure to obey lawful command. The timing, by the way, was quite remarkable. Police officers moved in with handcuffs the moment she finished her interview with the ABC News affiliate. Police told the station that supervisors said they could arrest anyone who could be, quote, positively identified, but only one person was arrested. That one who happened to be on television criticizing the United States government, criticizing the president of the United States. Make of that, of course, what you will. This is what American foreign policy looks like in 2026. Unilateral military operations, regime change, and then you're literally arresting people on camera who are standing up against it. The comparisons to past points in history, I think at this point are pointless because this is our history now. This is our America right now. It doesn't seem we're willing to learn these lessons. The next story, same line. I want to talk about, obviously, this is I said this in a different forum yesterday, got a lot of shit for it. I want you to know that I think if you're not taking the annexation of Greenland or Colombia or Cuba seriously, you are underreacting. So after bombing Venezuela and announcing plans to run the country, the administration decided this was a time, obviously, to escalate the rhetoric. The president told reporters on Sunday that, quote, "We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security, and Denmark is not going to be able to do it." He mocked Denmark's security posture, saying they'd add one more dog sled to Greenland's defense. He claimed Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place, and he has not ruled out military force to take the island. So let's establish the facts. Greenland is a semi-autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, which means it is part of NATO. The United States already operates a space base on Greenland under a 1951 defense agreement. We do have extensive military access to the island. Denmark just approved allowing U.S. military bases on Danish soil, so we already have what is needed for national security. But that's not what this is about. This is about Trump looking at a map and deciding he wants to have this place and this place and this place as part of the United States of America. Of course, Europe is really rallying to the defense of the island. Danish Prime Minister Frederiksen said that if the United States chose to attack another NATO country, then everything stops. That's including our NATO and the security that has been provided since the end of the Second World War. This language is literally threatening to upend the current world order. It's a defense alliance that has been placed since World War II. 75 years. Leaders across Europe are obviously rallying to defend the island, but you have to ask yourself, if you watch Stephen Miller on CNN, there's 30,000 people in Greenland. It's held together by the safety of the NATO alliance. What happens if the United States tries to take Greenland? NATO is dissolved instantly, is what happens. In the immediate aftermath of what happened in Venezuela, now you have the president talking about Greenland. Katie Miller, wife of Stephen Miller, posts this map of Greenland with an American flag and says, "Soon." It's wild to say this, but it's like we're watching the dissolution of the post-World Order, the post-World War II world order in real time. They're essentially breaking up the globe into what's controlled by America, what's controlled by Russia, what's controlled by China. European leaders are very right to be alarmed, but the United States citizens are right to be alarmed as well. It's not as though this government is being run by the most competent individuals at this time. Right? I can't make a fair comparison to say, like, at least our imperialism would be good if our government was competent. Like, that's a terrible thing to say. My dog just groaned because that's such a cringy statement to make. But the only comparison is like, oh my God, we're breaking up the world order and our government is terrible. Kind of shocking. Kind of shocking. Of course, closing out today, I do want to talk about January 6th. Good luck, TikTok, staying live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for following the Ignition News. It's been a rough covering the stories today. The Ignition News is a daily news show. We talk about what's happening in the United States of America, and we are a daily news show. Our goal is to be a source of truth and information. Before I get into the final story, I just want to acknowledge that even recording the news today, we're talking about today being January 6th. We're talking about Tim Walz stepping down because of violent threats against his family. We're talking about the U.S. breaking all the world order. We're talking about the president threatening openly the safety of countries in the NATO alliance. I understand how one might take today's show and be afraid, but what I would tell you is that if I can do it and push myself through the fear, you can do it as well. So let's do that. Let's talk about January 6th, shall we? Do me a big favor. If you're following along, you're watching live, you got to go find the Ignition News on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Click follow on the show and support us. Our show is supported and sponsored by Ignite, fighting fascism in the age of its rise. Let's continue to the final story, which is about January 6th. 5 years ago today, who remembers watching it live? It was surreal. I remember watching it live on an iPad at work, and I just remember as it sort of unfolded on live television, and I remember thinking to myself, like, why am I still at work right now? The government is like falling apart on real time. And I remember like asking my boss, like, should we still be working right now? And he's like, yeah, no, we're still working right now. And I'm watching the United States Capitol get stormed. It was the craziest memory ever. Obviously, we all know what happened on January 6th. But I think as this fascist regime continues to implement its exertion on the United States media, it's important, very important, that we continue to talk about what is happening. There is clearly an attempt to cover up and to change history about what happened on January 6th. So in as much as a billionaire does not control my show today, 5 years ago today, a mob of Trump supporters stormed the United States Capitol trying to overturn the 2020 election. More than 140 law enforcement officers were injured and at least 5 people died. It was the first time the Capitol had been breached since the War of 1812. For a brief moment, obviously, it looked like there was going to be accountability. There were investigations, there was a DOJ prosecution, and nearly 1,600 people were charged with crimes related to the attack. Of course, you have leaders of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. They got lengthy sentences. And as it was becoming very clear that the former president, Donald Trump, was going to be prosecuted by the Department of Justice in a case which we now know from Jack Smith's 8-hour deposition was essentially a completely unassailable, perfect case, the former president saw that his ostensible accountability was coming due. And so he decided to run for president. And in what is, honestly, I mean, I don't really have any commentary on that. I think it's a sad reflection on America. But Donald Trump became the president again. And as everyone said, his Department of Justice threw away the prosecutions. They ended them. It seems ostensibly that they've been doing their best to rewrite history. Of course, 1,500 people were pardoned by the president. I think it was on the first day, right? Inauguration day. We learned nothing from January 6th. There are many, many other cases of democracy defending itself aggressively, by the way, by prosecuting people who attack it. Look at Jair Bolsonaro. After the 1934 right-wing riots in France, they failed to hold leaders accountable, and many of those same organizers ended up in the Vichy government collaborating with the Nazis. Brazil arrested 1,000 rioters immediately after their attempted coup. Germany stopped their plot early, but America, we elected the man who incited the attack. Obviously, the consequences of this are very visible. The president remade the entire United States legal system in his image. He's got Pam Bondi running the DOJ. She's Attorney General, my bad. Kash Patel runs the FBI. You got Ed Martin, former attorneys for the President of the United States in the DOJ. The J6 investigation unit disbanded. Who knows what happened with all of that evidence? Most of the prosecutors were either demoted or resigned or they were fired. 5 years ago today. 5 years ago today. January 6, 2021. Part of what we have to recognize is the vast attempt to rewrite history. One of the reasons we do Ignition News, in spite of all of the sort of challenges of accurately and fairly reporting the news now, is because someone has to tell the truth. It's kind of sad to talk about this, but here's something that I want to talk about this. Congress passed a resolution in 2021 requiring a plaque to honor the police who defended the Capitol on January 6th. The resolution specified it should list the names of officers who responded to the violence that occurred, and it gave a 1-year deadline for the installation at the Capitol. The thing is, that plaque was never installed. Its whereabouts, it was apparently made. The plaque was apparently made. Its whereabouts are not known at this time. It is believed to be in storage at the United States Capitol. House Speaker Mike Johnson has refused to unveil the plaque, and the DOJ is seeking to dismiss a lawsuit from Harry Dunn and Daniel Hodges demanding that it be displayed by federal law. The lawsuit from the officers state, by refusing to follow the law and honor officers as required to do, Congress encourages the rewriting of history. So you have, I know it sounds like a small thing, but you have this plaque that Congress entered into law. They literally passed a law and said, you have to display this thing so that we all remember what happened. In the absence of the official plaque, 100 members of Congress have mounted poster board replicas outside of their office doors. Amy Raskin said, there are new generations of people who are just growing up who don't understand how close we came to losing our democracy on January 6, 2021. But that's exactly what all this erasure is designed to do. It's designed to make us forget that this ever happened. They are quite literally trying to rewrite history by not displaying a plaque, by pardoning the J6ers, by firing everyone that investigated it, by literally targeting to prosecute some of the people who were involved in the prosecutions. Later on, in a different format, we're going to go through Jack Smith's 8-hour deposition. But we did come close 5 years ago, January 6, 2021, to losing our democracy. And one would think that a country would be vibrant to recognize that, to remember that, and to move on from that. But it seems that we have not learned that lesson. Well, even though the rest of the country may have not learned that lesson, on the Ignition News, we know to tell the truth. That's why we're doing what we're doing. So how does this all together? Here's where we are on January 6th. We have hotels being pressured to be infrastructure for mass deportation. You have the United States is invading countries and announcing plans to govern them under what it calls law enforcement. The president is threatening to annex allied territory, and we're systemically erasing the memory of the last time American democracy was under attack. How do these stories all connect? Well, they are all about power. Who has the power, how the power is exercised, and what happens to anyone who gets in the way. It's about eroding institutional independence, the weaponization of federal agencies, the normalization of imperialism, and a deliberate culture of forgetting. The hotel that tried to stay neutral got destroyed publicly. The protesters who spoke about Venezuela got arrested on camera. This is the architecture, the structure, the systems of authoritarian power. That is what makes today, January 6th, 2026, the 5th anniversary so important. If we have learned nothing from what happened, what will we learn from what is happening right now? If we couldn't learn anything from that, how are we going to learn from what is happening right now? That's my question to you. You're watching me, a grown adult man in the United States of America, 2026, struggling to record the news, understanding that my voice is under threat by the United States government. Let me be very clear. If it's not obvious to you, I have to struggle along with you, listening and watching, as I say, how do I tell the truth? How do I tell the truth at a time when they're arresting people on camera just for speaking out? And the answer is you have to do it scared. You have to do it anyway. That's been the news today. It's January 6th, 2026. Don't forget what happened. Don't forget who you are. But most importantly, don't forget what you deserve from your country. Thanks for following us on the Ignition News. If you haven't subscribed to the show, if you haven't gone into Spotify, or you haven't gone into Apple Podcasts, or you haven't gone into YouTube, and you haven't clicked follow, and you haven't placed a nice little comment on the show, well, January 6th, everybody. This has been the Ignition News. Thanks for following along. Welcome to the Ignition News, your unfiltered, uncensored source for the actual truth in what is happening in the United States of America and around the world. We are not bought by the billionaires. We are here to be your source of truth in a time where truth matters more than it ever has. Be sure to follow along with your favorite platform on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Substack. Let's get busy with the truth. Welcome to the Ignition News. Let's ignite.